Hey, Robin.
Hi, Larry. How are you?
Well, thanks. How are you? Well, looks like we have a minute before we get everybody on.
Yeah,
I had a question for you.
you bet.
What did you do in Florence, Italy?
Oh, it was such a fabulous time. You must have read my bio. Good job. You did your homework. Um, oh my gosh. So I was there my junior year of college and I did a 1-year study abroad program. It was in 1999 for 2 semesters. So it was absolutely life-changing. And I don't mean that in a cliche way. Like it was really impactful and meaningful. It's a very cool program. And we traveled, we learned, some Italian. We were just immersed in all the things and in the culture. It was absolutely fabulous.
I bet.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I would have, good for you. Yeah. Where were you going to school?
Thank you. That's kind of you to ask. I went to Gonzaga University. It's up in Spokane. Go Zags.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our daughter almost went there. It was between Gonzaga and College of Idaho.
All right. Hello, everybody. Hate to interrupt a good conversation. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, then I will call this meeting of the City of Boise Public Works Commission to order. And let's go ahead and start our meeting with the approval of our minutes. I would entertain a motion or two for approval of the previous meeting minutes.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Crowley.
Do we want to take roll and make sure we have?
You're absolutely right. I skipped a step. Thank you for catching me. Before we move on to approval, I will call roll. If you are here, please let me know by saying aye. Commissioner Ellis.
Aye.
Commissioner Morgan.
Aye.
Commissioner Cross.
Aye.
Commissioner Wernz.
Aye.
Commissioner Collette.
Aye.
Commissioner Crowley.
Here.
Commissioner Lockett.
Aye.
All right. And I would also like to welcome, it looks like Councilmember Bajent is here. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Hi, everybody.
Oh, hi, Patrick.
And now we can move on with the first item on our agenda, the approval of our minutes. And I would entertain a motion or two for approval.
Mr. Chair, I would move to approve the minutes as published for both the regular meeting of September 7 and the work session of September 22.
Awesome. We have a motion from Commissioner Crowley. Do we have a second?
This is Commissioner Morgan. I second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, the same sign? Hearing none, the motion carries and the minutes are approved. Thank you. And right before jumping into our regular agenda items, I would like to take just a moment to allow the new member of the commission to introduce himself real quick. And I would turn it over to Commissioner Wernz for a quick intro.
Thank you so much. And I guess I'll address fellow commissioners. Hi, Jen, and other members of the public here that my name's Jim Wernz. I'm very excited to be joining the commission. Just by way of a quick background, I am retired as of a couple of years ago after having a long career at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and a lot of that work involved working with municipalities like Boise, and got to know a lot about infrastructure and water systems and sewer systems and other important infrastructure in that long career. So I'm excited to be joining and participating in the dialogue here. I'm crazy about Boise. I've lived here 22 years, and it's just a chance for me, I think, to give back a little bit and serve on the commission. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. I think you'll bring some pretty invaluable perspectives. And to help introduce you, I would turn it over just for a quick minute for a quick intro from staff. And Director Burgos, take it away.
Thank you, Chair. I know Commissioner Warren, so I'll skip my introduction. But I wanted to have the senior managers come up to the microphone. If you could just introduce yourselves, your position, and generally what your role is at the city, I'd appreciate it.
Hi, Jim Party. I'm the city engineer. Role is anything engineering related, not for only for public works, but for some of the other departments as well.
Hi, I'm Sean Wilson, and Jim, I've worked with you before, Dixie Drain. It's been a while, but anyways, my role is facilities. So outside of the wastewater biz now, but take care of like City Hall, fire stations. And we got two groups. We have a capital delivery group for new stuff, and then an operations and maintenance group where we take care of our existing assets. So anyways, welcome aboard, Jim.
Good afternoon. I'm Steve Hubble. I'm the climate action manager for the city, and our team manages our climate sustainability and clean energy functions, both supporting, doing work directly, supporting the public works team, and then the broader city organization as well. Nice to meet you.
Good afternoon. My name is Heather Buchanan. Nice to meet you. I am the Public Works Chief Administration Officer. So my team is responsible for utility billing, records management and administration support services, and also all of our revenue analysis, cash flow, setting rates and so forth. So nice to meet you. Thanks.
Commissioner Wernz, welcome. Nice to meet you. My name is Colin Hickman. I am the Business Strategy Senior Manager. It's a new position. I've been in this position for, I think, about 3 weeks now. So helping the department focus on what are our priorities and ensuring that we're focusing on the right things at the right time with the right people. So very nice to meet you.
And then Haley, I don't know if you're on. There you are.
I am hiding. Hi, Commissioner Wernz. Great to see you. Apologies, I can't be there in person. Haley Faulkner. I am the environmental manager in Public Works, and currently that includes our long-term strategic planning and capital planning for water renewal, as well as the development and implementation of our recycled water program.
It's nice to see you again, Haley.
You as well. I turned my camera off too soon.
And then last but not least, Commissioner Warren's Marcia Schmelzer, who's our operations manager, couldn't be here tonight, but she's in charge of basically running the facilities. She's got the largest staff of all the senior managers, probably about 170 folks. So it plays a really important role. And you maybe know Marcia, but she's awesome to work with, and I know is excited to see you on the commission. So, Chair.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for a quick intro from the best team in the city. The next item of business is the election and appointment of Public Works Commission officials. 2 positions are up for election, chair and vice chair. And at this time, I'll accept a nomination for chair. Commissioner Ellis.
Chair Kravats, I nominate the Commissioner and Chair Crispin Kravats.
And I do accept. Do we have a second for the nomination of myself as chair?
Chair Kravats, I'd be happy to second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Collette. All those in favor of appointing myself as chair of the Public Works Commission, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed, the same sign? Hearing none, the motion carries, and thank you for your continued support and confidence. At this time, I'll accept the nomination for vice chair.
Chair,
Commissioner Morgan,
I would like to appoint Jennifer Ellis.
do you accept the nomination?
I do.
Awesome. Do we have a second for the nomination of Commissioner Ellis as the vice chair?
Mr. Chair, I would second that motion.
A second from Commissioner Crowley. All those in favor of appointing Jennifer Ellis as the vice chair of the Public Works Commission, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, the same sign? Hearing none, the motion carries.
Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. And now moving on with our agenda, the next item is the Enhance the River update, and I will turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Chair. The first topic, Enhance the River update, is an update on a portion of the water renewal utility plan that was a key component when that was passed by City Council. And so we wanted to provide an update to the Commission on kind of the latest associated with the initiative. What are some of the types of projects we're going to be looking at as part of Enhance the River? components and then open it up to any questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Kate Harris, who is our water quality program manager. Kate.
Okay. Chair, Commissioners, Council Member, my name is Kate Harris, and I'm the Water Quality Programs Manager in the Environmental Division. In my role, I oversee Source Control Program, which we'll hear about in the next presentation, Sampling and Monitoring Group. We have an Environmental Data Analyst and Regulatory Compliance. Last time I spoke before Public Works Commission was in July when I presented on the new permits for our water renewal facilities. The program that I'm going to present today is completely different. It's a shift from anything that I've worked on at the city. My job has been centered around regulatory compliance and also evaluating compliance alternatives that maybe have better environmental outcomes. But this is completely different, and I'm happy to say it's also a shift in how Water Renewal Services is taking their role as stewards of the Boise River. So for example, historically, we've been stewards of the Boise River by upgrading our water renewal facilities and running them efficiently to make sure that we're protecting the human life and the Boise River. But when the program we'll talk about today actually includes improvements that are outside of the fences of our water renewal facilities. Just a brief agenda. I'll present the program drivers, a little background on why the program is necessary. I'll describe 2 tools that support the program, and of course, provide you a status update. There are 3 main program drivers: the Water Renewal Utility Plan, the City of Boise Climate Action Plan Roadmap, and support for the city's IPDS thermal variance request. And I'll go over just these briefly. So the primary driver is the Water Renewal Utility Plan. And published in 2020, this plan established the vision for water renewal services for the next several decades. Now, this plan itself was a shift in mindset from past efforts. So in the past, we were required to do what are called facility plans for our water renewal facilities, and we had to describe how the city is going to accommodate growth and meet the environmental regulations. This program, and you can just notice from just the name change from facility plan to utility plan, outlined where we want to go in water renewal services, what resources we want to protect, what products we want to produce. And one of the main differences of the development of this plan is that the public was involved from the very beginning. I think it's Steve Burgos that describes it as it was a plan for Boise by Boiseans. One clear outcome of the plan is that our community expects water renewal services to prioritize the health of the Boise River, and they want us to enhance the river beyond our current regulatory requirements. Now, while the Water Renewal Utility Plan was the main driver, the Enhanced River Program does support other important city programs and efforts. There, sorry. This slide shows the 7 priority areas that were identified in the Climate Action Roadmap and 23 opportunities. The Enhanced River Program would support the natural environment and the water sectors. And the third driver that I'll touch on is support for the city's 316A thermal variance request. We have 2 water renewal facilities that discharge to the Boise River, and one has temperature limits for our discharges. We discharge water that is warmer than the Boise River, and right now we're actually unable to meet the final limits in the permit. We have interim limits now and a schedule of compliance to reach those final limits. After an extensive compliance alternatives analysis and a review of the biological and environmental data on the Boise River, the city opted to apply for a variance. Now, the Clean Water Act says that if a permittee can show that the limits in their permits are more stringent than necessary to protect the aquatic community that lives in the river, you can apply for a variance. And you have to demonstrate this through the permittee has to demonstrate why this is so. So we've applied for this. We're working on this with DEQ. If it is granted, the variance is only good for 5 years. You have to show that you're making improvements in 5 years, or when you apply for the variance again, it could be denied. And you have to start all over again. I'm going to stop there for just a second. Any questions on that?
Any questions from the commission? Commissioner Ellis.
I do have a question. Were there a specific reason why these pictures were put in there? Were these specific species that we should be concerned with?
Yes, thank you. Those are 3 important fish species in the Lower Boise River. The sculpin is on the left. They're kind of creepy looking, but they're important, and they're important water indicators of water quality. We have a rainbow trout and a brown trout on the right. And then just as an example of a macroinvertebrate species, or the fish food that live in the river, that we also have to show that we're protecting. Thank you for the question, Commissioner.
Any other questions before moving on? Yes, Commissioner
Thank
Wertz.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question. You probably said it and I missed it, but where are we in the timeline? Where are you in the timeline on the 316A variance process? I know it's quite involved.
Chair, Commissioner. So the city submitted a demonstration report in, the latest version was in February of 2021. And the DEQ was working on a decision. We had a few points that we were still working through. And unfortunately, we had to put the variance request on hold to get our permits out for our water renewal facilities before other schedules of compliance expired. It is written into our new schedule of compliance that we will have the variance request done within 2 years. However, we've been working with DEQ to accelerate that schedule to 1 year. So we are actually working with DEQ on those remaining issues, and we'll have a decision at the end of 1 year, which will be July of 2023.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate that the Enhanced River Program supports the city's request by improving habitat for aquatic life in the Lower Boise River. And this embodies the objective of the Clean Water Act, and not only to restore and maintain the chemical and physical integrity, but also the biological integrity of the nation's waters. So some of you might be thinking, well, what's the problem? The Boiseans love the Boise River. It's a gorgeous river. And in fact, there's a photo that's in the kind of towards the right bottom. The sampling monitoring team caught that fish yesterday. It's a giant brown trout, and it was up at Eckerd Road. We know that it's a popular river for tubing, for the Whitewater Park, and for fishing and additional recreation. However, within the last century, the Lower Boise River has been transformed from a meandering, braided gravel bed river that supported large river runs of salmon to a channelized, regulated river with the primary function of flood control and providing irrigation water to more than 1,200 square miles of land. The next series of photographs I'm going to show are some aerial photos to describe the progression. This photo is from 1939. And as you can see, the channel is very complex. It's braided. There are lots of side channels. The river is connected to the floodplain. And even though it doesn't show up quite as well in the photographs, there are cottonwoods trees on the sandbars. I'm going to ask you to keep your eye on this side channel here, which is one of the prominent side channels. And this square here, I'm going to come back to later in the discussion. This is 1939, and just 25 years later, you can see, for example, that side channel on the left was completely cut off, and the floodplain has been developed. Now, part of this was for, of course, development of the city. You can also see, a pointer, the Lander Street. Oh, the Lander Street Water Renewal Facility. I'm pointing to the pointer right now, which is right there. Now, a lot of this was for community development and also because of for flood control and irrigation conveyance. So this is 1964. Lucky Peak Dam construction began in 1949. Anderson Ranch was finished in 1951. So we did have Arrow Rock Dam back in 1915, but a lot of these changes were due to flood control and being able to support the Boise population. In 2016, you can see that the floodplain is completely developed and channelization is almost complete. By that, I mean the braids in the river have been removed. It's one straight channel with a few bends. And you can see the removal of the cottonwoods, and that's, again, that side channel is gone. Now that item in the lower right, I don't know if you can see it or not, but you can see the channel is trying to actually split into 2 channels there, but I will come back to that. And there were some improvements in the 1980s, such as minimum stream flow agreements, but the river continues to be impacted by development and growth. Now, why is this a problem? Why is this bad for the habitat? And one of the main reasons is that this is a completely different stream flow in the lower Boise River. And I should define the lower Boise River that I'm talking about is from the 64-mile stretch from Lucky Peak to the Snake River. So this isn't the typical flow pattern that you would see in natural streams. And that typical flow pattern include environmental cues for the biology that live there, when they need to reproduce, when they need to overwinter. And also the physical habitat has been highly altered. So by removing the braiding, by removing the sinuosity, you've changed the natural pool riffle sequence, which is important for fish habitat, but also for channel processing of nutrients and sediments. And by removing the side channels, and of course, and the braiding, is that you've removed a lot of habitat that can serve as flow refugia. So for example, during high flows, if all the flows just moving down one main channel, there's nowhere for the species to essentially to hide to get away from that flow. Now, I've made this look very dire. And so we know that there's problems and we know that our community wants us to do something about it. But before we started the work, we had to define what enhance the river actually means. Now, this program has dedicated funding from Water Renewal Services. So the definition I'm going to provide today is simply for that program. If you asked 100 people what enhance the river means, they could say 100 different things. But for our program, our objective is to improve water quality, improve aquatic and riparian habitat. Riparian is the area that's adjacent to the streams or water bodies, and also to improve stream channel structure and function. The city has a dedicated sampling and monitoring group that already collects a lot of data on the Boise River. This group is amazing. There's a team of 5, including our coordinator who came to us from the USGS after 30 years of experience and was already the expert on the lower Boise River for USGS water quality data and the biology that lived there. And she's also helped us expand the program, mainly in support of our 316A thermal variants. So the photos in the lower right-hand corner is something that we've added just in a couple of years. That's one of our team members measuring a mussel that they found in the river. So we snorkel the rivers to look at substrate, look for fish and mussels. On the way left, they are backpack shocking, a side channel for fish. And in the center is we're collecting what are called clean hand samples across the river. And the top right is one of my favorite pictures. We were getting ready for emerging contaminants sampling, and you had to wear special gear, and we were geared up for that. And our lab staff that is a strong supporter of the program is standing behind them. Now, because of this program, we have a lot of data on the Boise River. We know what the problems are, but the next question is, so now that we know all of this, how do we make the jump then to doing restoration projects? So one of the first things we did was meet with Fish and Game, the Idaho Department of Fish and Game. They sample the river, they know where the problems are. And while they were happy to meet with us, their recommendation was you need to start with a clear understanding of the geomorphology, which is the landform of the river, and related hydraulics. If you don't know that, you don't know what projects to implement. Well, that was in late 2015. In 2016, the Boise River experienced the flooding. And because of the flooding, the Army Corps of Engineer and Flood Control District 10 developed a tool to help manage the flows on the lower Boise River. It was mainly developed for predicting flood flows and flow management. It's a 2D, two-dimensional hydraulic model. And what that means is that it's not just a picture of a stick figure, but it's actually, we used a tool called LIDAR, which is light laser detection and ranging. And the plane flew over the watershed. We did it in the river in the winter when the trees were off, and they actually got a 3D scan of the river and the surrounding riparian area. And so we know how deep the channel was at all of these areas. We know how high the vegetation was. And from there, they made this publicly available, and we developed some really fantastic tools. So let me just show you an aspect of this. So the goals was for flooding. So this is a graphic showing velocity. You can see that. So that is a simulation of velocity of the stretch of the Boise River. And then the photo on the left, the point that is right here, oops, sorry, is this point right here. And while the flows might be a little bit different of actual versus simulated, you can see that it did capture that area really well. So they made that publicly available, and that was the first step that Idaho Fish and Game told us to do. But what the city did next is create a hydraulic habitat suitability model. So if we know the water depth and we know the velocity, and from literature values, we know what fish species prefer and what life stages of each fish species prefer, we can actually create maps of which areas of the Boise River are even suitable for those fish species. So for example, the top graphic is water depth, the middle one is velocity, and then on the bottom is a hybrid of those for fish species, where blue is best quality habitat, green is good, yellow is low, red is very poor, and the other one is just channel isn't flowing. Now that's just a hypothetical example, but let me show you one for actually our Boise River. This is the Boise River in the South Channel right behind our West Boise Water Renewal Facility. And this is a low flow condition, and we're looking at conditions for juvenile rainbow trout. Green indicates high habitat suitability, yellow low, and red very poor. So you can see it's fairly mixed there. For comparison, I'm going to show you the high flow, and you can see from the, of course, the abundance of the red and yellow colors that there isn't much habitat available at high flows. But there is one tiny green line that is right here that I'm going to come back to. So just to recap, we needed a better understanding of the river and before we started implementing projects. So now I'll describe kind of what some of those projects might be, and then the next tool that we're using to aid in implementation. Just an example, we have a list of potential projects, and these have come from many sources. So some are projects that we identified several years ago in an effort to identify projects that would reduce stream temperature. Some projects have been identified by other local environmental groups, such as the Boise River Enhancement Network. And we even get calls from groups who are working on projects or thinking about projects and think that the city would be a benefit as a stakeholder as well. Now, this isn't a complete list, but these are just some examples. So for example, increasing the in-stream complexity, doing a riverbank restoration, side channel creation or reconnection, and others. So just more specifically, Mr. Burgos, how am I doing on time? Okay. So this is one that I mentioned when we looked at the high flows for West Boise. One of the projects could be reconnecting Warm Springs Canal, which flows along here, and adding that as a side channel to the Boise River. The benefits would be adding more spawning and rearing habitat. It would decrease temperature, add channel complexity, and also add river resilience by improving the flows during medium and high flows. Another example, and this goes back to that little square in the lower right-hand corner of the aerial photographs when I said that in 2016, it looks like the river's trying to start to braid or is trying to start to do something. We could actually help it along and actually add channel complexity or side channels in the stream. So for example, these blue lines here, where you can see that at high flows, it actually does flow there, just not year round. And also there's a blue line there and even a blue line there. 5 minutes, okay. I'm going to move on then. So there are many projects, but the next tool that we're developing now that we have all of these projects, because they are funded by Water Renewal Services, we wanted to develop a tool that demonstrates that we are spending the funds wisely. How do we know which projects to implement? And our objective was to create a framework that was transparent in project selection, but also allowed us to reasonably quickly assess as many projects and rank them. We had an internal team that developed a set of criteria. Again, these are only specific to this Water Renewal Services objectives. And there are 7 criteria listed here, but there are sub-criteria. So for example, under water quality, we have sub-criteria for reduced river temperature, reduced load of nutrients, reduced sediment. And for each of these criteria, we will be developing scales. So for example, for each of those, what results in a poor outcome, what is a medium outcome, and what is an excellent outcome, and then assign scores to each of those so we can to rank them. The last thing we need to do is decide if any of those criteria need to be weighted. So for example, I think temperature should have a higher weight than some of the other criteria, but that's a policy decision that we still need to work through. The score, in combination with project cost, allows us to make data-informed decisions about project selection. And I just want to say the most exciting part of this opportunity is to work with agencies that we don't normally partner with to identify areas that we can work together to benefit all of us in creating a win-win-win scenario. So again, it's a fundamental shift in our thinking from assessment to action. And our next steps are to finalize that prioritization framework that I discussed and start identifying projects. And with that, I will take any questions if there's time.
Thank you.
Chair, thanks, Kate. And how that'll work is we'll start coming back to you on an annual basis with, like, for this fiscal year, for that fiscal year, here are the recommended Enhance the River projects. So Kate and the team will start selecting projects for you all to consider. We'll put that in the budget for funding. And so you'll see all that and how we came up with that list.
Awesome. Thank you. Any questions from the commission?
Mr. Chair, this is Larry.
Commissioner Crowley.
I just want to say, Kate, I was impressed with your presentation. I think it was in July, and it just today was even more impressive. I'm really impressed with the work that you're doing and the quality of the work and the perspective that you're providing this commission about the water quality issues in the river is really very impressive. So I wanted to thank you for that, number one. And secondly, I did have one question on one of the slides. You were showing the differences in water quality by using different colors. And you had one slide that showed the differences in water quality based on low flows and compared that with high flows. I was wondering if you could explain why such significant differences in water quality between the two flow levels?
Chair, Commissioner, thank you for the question. I should have been more specific. The model right now specifically looked at hydraulic suitability. So for example, it's not water quality, it's not sediment content in the water, it's not nutrients, but actually it's simply the hydraulics, the velocity of the water. Can the fish, that's life stage at that species exist there? So our future plans are to overlay that with sediment habitat and water quality or temperature, but that's a little down the road.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the commission?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Lockett.
pardon me, didn't mean to interrupt. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question, although I think the director mostly answered it for me on budget, so I appreciate that. Ms. Harris, thank you for your presentation. I am new to the commission and just learning, and I really am excited about this. I really liked the rainbow trout habitat simulation and kind of how that could look. We all love fishing. We all love the river, like you said. I mean, everyone speaks of the beauty of it, but we've got to take care of it. So I like that you're looking at a really scientific level. Those are things that people do above my pay grade. So that's very cool. Tell me if I heard this right, please. Here's my question, please. Did you say this is funded with water renewal services dollars?
Chair, Commissioner, that is correct.
Okay, and do you have an overall budget for your division, program, unit, whatever you call it in the water quality environmental program?
I do. Currently, it is $1.3 million a year.
Okay. And then that $1.3 million, thank you, that $1.3 million is for your operations. If I'm understanding that correctly, you'll also come back and look for additional project specific funding in future meetings so that we would make those recommendations to be included in the budget. I just want to confirm I'm understanding the process, please.
Chair, Commissioner, that is correct. And also we will be looking for partners to partner on. And for example, people are reaching out to us that have funds and say, hey, we have $400,000 we'd like to invest in water quality improvement in the lower Boise River. What projects do you have for us? So by having this list of projects ready and being able to readily identify partners and other partner funding sources, of course, our dollars can go a lot further to enhancing the river.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ellis?
Yes, I did have a question on the very cool video that you were showing, the velocity. I'm a little embarrassed to ask it, but I'll ask it. Is the color, it was like almost like a fluorescent green in the middle. So is that just what was the color showing us? Because we could see the flow, but I didn't know what the color was showing us.
Chair, Commissioner, thank you. That was simulating high velocity.
Okay, so
And
that was all. So what was moving was the neon was just really little. That was moving really fast.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Chair, just a
Yes.
point of clarification for Commissioner Lockett. Your question on the budget, the 1.3 million that was mentioned, that's the funding that's allocated currently for actual capital projects. The funding of the group, we can get that number for you. That's rolled into water renewal services for Kate's group. So we can get that number for you. But the 1.3, just for clarification, that's the budget we're setting aside in the capital fund to actually construct projects.
Okay, so the 1.3 is kind of our share, pardon me, Mr. Chair and Director. Yep, pardon me. So the 1.3 is our initial money for capital outlay towards these projects, or separate capital outlay entirely?
It's a Commissioner, it's a capital outlay that we're estimating for, say, for example, we want to do a riparian habitat restoration project. That project may cost, I don't know, let's say example, $100,000. Then we'd have 1.2 million left to do other projects. So currently we're holding that number as an estimate for the types of projects we want to do. That could go up or down on an annual basis, but just currently that's what we're holding.
Got it. Thank you. And then additional funds on top of that, should we find grant partners, other partners, et cetera, right?
Correct.
Pardon me, pardon my doorbell. Keeps ringing. Very good. Thank you, folks. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions from the commission? All right, hearing none. Thank you very much.
Chair, Commissioners, Council Member, thank you.
All right, and now let's move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the pre-treatment program overview and new PFAS best management practices for industries. And I will turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Chair. This is a really interesting topic and a hot topic. PFAS issues are an emerging one, certainly nationally, and we're no different locally. So we wanted to provide some information on, one, just our pre-treatment folks in that group and what they do. It's a group that doesn't necessarily get a chance to be in front of you all very often. So Austin Wilkins is the lead source control manager, and that also includes pre-treatment. So he's going to give you an overview of the pre-treatment program writ large, but then specifically some of the PFAS BMPs that we're trying to put in place to try to get a head start, because we know these regulations are coming. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Austin.
Thank you. Chair, Commissioners, my name, Council Member, apologize, Steve. We were working through some technology work, so I missed that intro, but I'm Austin Wilkins. I'm the Source Control Manager for the City of Boise. So I oversee the pretreatment and the stormwater programs. This might have been already said, but yeah, I wanted to give a general overview about the pretreatment program and what we do and the role we serve with the city, and then also dive into some specifics about some PFAS best management practices we'll be rolling out here soon. I'd like to start with just the broad question of why do we have a pretreatment program? The easiest answer is because it's required under the Clean Water Act, but there's a reason that it's required under the Clean Water Act. As you'll see in this diagram, we have our water renewal facilities placed kind of at the center of this diagram, and those are really designed to primarily treat sewage from households, domestic wastewater. And so these arrows show you have your domestic wastewater that comes into our renewal facilities. We treat that water, then we have clean water that goes out to the Boise River, and then some of the solids we're able to reuse and send out to our 20 Mile South farm, which is our biosolids application site. And we can use that to sort of fertilizer to grow crops. When we add industrial sources of pollution into that mix, they vary slightly from your traditional household domestic wastewater. When we think of industrial wastewater, we think of more heavy metals, more synthetic chemicals, which differ from traditional household wastewater. Our renewal facilities can handle some of this, but it's really important that we don't let too much into our system and kind of overwhelm our renewal facilities. If that were to happen, it jeopardizes a number of things. First and foremost, worker safety. The staff that work in and around the collection and treatment system, they could be exposed to hazardous conditions. Think flammable, explosive, exposure to noxious fumes. Our environment is critically important. We don't want to see things that enter our treatment facility go untreated or maybe overwhelm the treatment system and make it less efficient in its treatment operations, and potentially pass through to the system, either the Boise River, or maybe some of the biosolids that we apply at the farm. And then also the economics, how our system is designed. There's an economic piece to this, and what rates folks pay is dependent on where we can send things. So if some industrial source came in and made it unfeasible for us to say send biosolids to our farm, that might change the economics of our system, and that would ultimately impact our ratepayers. So these are three of some of the most critical pieces that our pretreatment program works on. If I had to, there's a lot of folks that work on the operations side of running a city, especially a water renewal facility. Pre-treatment is kind of that first line of defense with our operations team. So we're really in the midpoint of that orange arrow between the industries and our operations folks. to the best of our ability, we want to manage pollution at its source. So we want to work with our industries, understand the processes they're working on, what sort of pollution are they generating, can we eliminate that? And if we can't eliminate that, what are our other opportunities? Can we control it? Can we alter its form somehow? Make sure that what they are sending us, it's at a level and a quantity that's allowable in our system. We really, as I mentioned before, want to prevent those upsets or interference at the plant. We treat for a lot of pollutants, and so we want to make sure that nothing's introduced to the plants that hurts that efficacy. And then also pass through, we don't want something to enter our facilities, go untreated, and then go into the environment. So controlling that at the source is one of the best approaches to limiting the pollution that can enter our environment. And then that last point, since the inception of the pretreatment program nationally, it's always been a goal to promote recycling and reclamation. And this is really quite the scale that we work on. So obviously water recycling is getting a lot of attention right now. It's on a very large scale. I'm very proud to be at a city that's at the forefront of that. But my team has also worked with some of our industries on really small operations. Think of equipment that's used to water to cool equipment or some sort of a cutting or abrasive material that uses water, working with them to filter some of those material in that, recycle that water and keep it going that way. So, we work on recycling water from a single process to being part of the multiple teams at the city working on a whole new program, which is exciting. Every pretreatment program is going to be unique to the city that they're a part of. And a big driver of that is the receiving water that their water renewal or their wastewater treatment facilities discharge into. So for ours, that's the Boise River. Relatively speaking, the Boise River is kind of a small water body, especially if you think of some of those coastal cities that discharge into the ocean. So our program has some things that are different than maybe coastal programs would have or other programs and discharging to bigger water bodies would have. I think another thing that really distinguishes our program is the core values that I list up here. We're an extremely proactive program. We like to get ahead of issues. We like to keep our eyes on the horizon, see what's coming down the pipeline, and understand what we need to do to prepare. And that feeds into the next bullet point. We're very collaborative with our industries. Having that eye towards the future, trying to get an understanding of what's coming our way helps us in those conversations of, we can enter into meetings and discussions with our industries and say, here's what we think is going to happen. How is that going to impact you? Here's how it's going to impact us. How do we work together on this? And then that last bullet point, I just feel really lucky. I think everyone, both internally at the city and externally with our partners, we have this shared vision of protecting the Boise River. And I think when you're united in that shared vision, this work is challenging. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's easy. The shared vision of that helps make it easier. Everyone that we work with wants to protect the Boise River, which is great. And I just want to highlight a recent example that I think really captures kind of the essence of our program. With back in 2014, the city created a local limit for mercury. Local limit, that's a limit that's unique to a city or a system. And so that differs for every city. Could have different pollutants that they have limits for, or different levels for certain pollutants. And those are what's called those local limits. Our mercury local limit was driven by some permit requirements. And we knew that dental offices, the amalgam that they set for cavities set and remove, was a big source of mercury. We also knew that the EPA was working on some requirements for dental offices, but we didn't have an exact timeline of when that was going to happen. And we decided that we wanted to proceed regardless. And so we met with our dental offices. We built a best management program around handling mercury, had them install some treatment equipment. And to date, we've seen some incredible results from that. We've had incoming mercury levels reduced by 55%. We're seeing full compliance with our dental community. The requirements that we have for them have been very manageable. And, I think it really highlights the efficacy of getting ahead of things and tackling them from an early onset. Kind kind of the last slide on the program as an overview, I just want to give a brief summary. We're a team of 6 staff. I wish I had 15 minutes to talk to you about how great my staff is. They're in the unique position of we play the critical role of protecting the city's assets and our personnel, while at the same time working with industries and understanding the decision we make can have impacts on them and how they run their business. So it's not a decision, or it's not work that we take lightly, but they do an exceptional job. Our team manages over 2,000 businesses throughout the city. A lot of those are smaller facilities. So think restaurants, auto garages, laundromats, a lot of the small businesses. Individually, oftentimes these aren't of concern. It's when you realize how many of them there are throughout the city. The cumulative impact is what we like to keep an eye on. I have this. A, I think it's cool that our program has a Lego set. B, I think this Lego set really highlights some of the work that folks have heard of pretreatment. Sometimes folks have heard of like fatbergs, where grease and quote unquote flushable wipes get into the sewer. And it ends up clogging up the system. And pretreatment, part of our goal is to work with these small industries to say, here's your cumulative impact. Let's work together to make sure you don't overwhelm our system. The other piece of our program is what I'll talk more about today, and that's our significant industrial user, or our SIU program. That's that word significant. There are some metrics that defines whether an industry is significant or not. It is a regulatory term. And in our jurisdiction, we currently have 15 significant industrial users. The easiest way to describe these is they're the largest and or the most impactful users of our system. So this is our semiconductor manufacturers, our dairies, our metal finishers. It's quite a range of industries. And if, depending on which facility you're looking at, Lander and West Boise, they're anywhere from 10 to 25% of our incoming flows, just these 15 facilities alone. So they, as the name implies, they're a significant portion of our operations. Before I pivot to the PFAS BMPs, or best management practices, I guess I want to pause there. If folks have any general pretreatment questions.
Any questions so far from the commission? All right, hearing none, back to you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Oh, yes, Commissioner Crowley.
Just one quick question. Austin, once you've collected all the waste materials from the smaller customers that you're referring to, and you pumped it into this tank truck, I like the Lego thing, by the way. What do you do with it? Where does it go after you've collected it?
Chair, Commissioner. So it depends. Oftentimes what we try to do, especially if, as this Lego set illustrates, some of this grease that gets in the city, we try to work with our facilities that produce grease, mostly our restaurants. All of those facilities are outfitted with what's called a grease interceptor. So it's essentially a big concrete box in the ground outside of their restaurant that captures that grease before it can get into our facility. And one of their requirements is to have that cleaned at regular intervals to keep the grease level down. So they would contract a third party to pump that out. And most of those trucks then take that to some sort of lined pond, where that material is then water's evaporated off, and then whatever solids are left over are properly disposed of. There's a lot of options. There's ways to recycle grease. There's ways to turn it into biofuels. Those are sort of, I guess, the private market. We as long as folks are keeping up with our pretreatment requirements and adhering to all local, state, federal laws with disposal practices, we're agnostic to how they handle it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, hearing none, back to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to pivot now to discuss a specific action we're taking related to PFAS and some best management practices. I'll start with kind of an overview of what PFAS is. So PFAS is per and polyfluorinated substances. These are commonly collectively referred to just as PFAS, or oftentimes you'll hear of these spoken of as forever chemicals. And that's because they don't tend to degrade in the environment. So once they're out there, they stick around forever. And PFAS it's hundreds of human-made chemicals. The list seems like it's constantly growing, but it's quite a few. As this figure illustrates on this slide, there's a variety of sources that can generate PFAS. And you'll notice at the center of this slide is our wastewater treatment plant. So there's a lot of sources out there. A lot of them end up coming via directly or indirectly through the wastewater treatment plant. One of the reasons I'm here today, two of these PFAS compounds, PFOS and PFOA, are being proposed to be listed under CERCLA, which is more commonly referred to as the Superfund law. If you're not familiar with CERCLA or Superfund, this is the law that governs the cleanup and the liability and who's responsible for cleaning up sites that are contaminated with hazardous waste. So if this proposal goes through and if these two compounds are listed under CERCLA, essentially overnight, locations that have PFOS and PFOA at concentrations above a threshold would become Superfund sites, and the owners of that location would immediately become responsible for the cleanup, or potentially responsible for the cleanup and the remediation of that site. This has us concerned as a city. The city, we're passive receivers of a lot of waste. We don't produce this, we don't market it, we don't profit from it. But again, pointing back to this figure, all arrows point towards a wastewater treatment plant. So we receive it whether we like it or not. So it is, we want to be sure we're on top of what's going on, so we understand if this change goes through, what that means for our program, what it means for the city at large. The ultimate goal with our program is to identify sort of a budget. So each of these arrows, we'd be able to understand how much is coming from these sources, how often, is it continuous, is it periodic, and we'd essentially know what's coming in and what's going out. The first step of that program or that process is going to be looking at our significant industrial users. Again, those 15 large and impactful industrial users. And there's two main reasons for that. The first is, as I mentioned, they produce a significant amount of flow to our plants. And the second thing is, as we build this budget, some of these arrows are controllable. There's things we can do about it. We can work with our industries on solutions to PFAS, and some of them might be beyond the scope of what we can do. So thinking household domestic wastewater, PFAS isn't just found in industrial processes. It's on raincoats, it's on cookware, it's on food packaging. So as we build this budget, we also need to know where we can take action and where maybe education, not to say education isn't an action, but where education might be the more appropriate tool. The best management practices that we plan to roll out right now, again, it's focused on just quantifying these sources, identifying and quantifying these sources. So we're going to be requiring quarterly monitoring of the wastewater coming from our industrial users. And then based on that wastewater, if PFAS are detected, we're going to work with those industries. Can we eliminate that? So is it coming from particular products? Can we substitute those products out of their processes to basically eliminate it at the source? And if that's not feasible, can we then explore options of what sort of treatment can we install? How do we control it at your source? How do we ensure that it's coming to our renewal facilities at a level that's not going to overwhelm our system? I do want to note our 15 significant industrial users in town currently, as part of their compliance and permitting obligations, they are required to sample their wastewater, and they are responsible for paying for that sampling. These new monitoring requirements will also incur a cost to these industries. We are discussing this issue with every issues. We try to coordinate not only with our industries, but also other Treasure Valley cities, trying to learn what others are doing. Are there different approaches we can be taking? Those conversations are ongoing. And we're always exploring options and ways to collaborate with folks. So this initial work, this is how we plan to roll it out. It could change with time as we talk to these industries and learn more about kind of their needs and what works best for them. The next steps in the coming weeks, we'll be sending a letter to our SIUs, our significant industrial users, informing them that these changes are coming. In that letter, we're going to highly encourage them to set up meeting with myself and my staff to discuss why the city is undertaking this, what it means for them, hear their feedback, and make sure they have a firm understanding of what we're requiring and why. The ultimate goal is to roll out these best management practices beginning in April of 2023. We want to give our SIUs about 6 months of a heads up to help them plan, give time for meetings. So that's the tentative date, and it's looking like we're going to hit that. But that's what we're aiming for. This is my last slide here, and I want to conclude by going back to the beginning of why we have a pretreatment program. I know PFAS, they've been around since the 40s, but some of the attention they're getting, it seems new, it seems emerging, it seems it's certainly of concern. But the role that pretreatment plays, the process that we're undertaking, our goals, these aren't new. This is why we have a program to identify this pollution, stop it at its source if we can, and if we can't, control it and understand it so our operations team knows. We really try to be a data-informed city. You'll see that in every presentation today, I think. And so collecting this data with our SIUs, that's a key part of informing and guiding our decisions going forward. And it's not just for the pretreatment team. Once we have this data, we hope to share that with our operations team so they can get an understanding, how will this impact their current treatment equipment? Will it impact it? Do we need more equipment? Do we need different equipment? And then again, bringing it back to that economic piece is what is the cost of complying with this? And not least of which, we want to work with community engagement. A lot of this presentation has focused on the relationship between pretreatment and our industries, but we recognize our community is an equally important player. They have expectations for how we control pollution at the source. So keeping them informed of the work that we're doing, then also hearing the feedback of how we're doing, what we're doing, and if we should be exploring other options. And with that, I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Chair, just something to add here at the end. One, thanks to Austin and the team. The pretreatment folks are pretty unsung folks. They're the folks out on the front lines. They're very customer facing. They're interacting with restaurants, with the SIUs, and they do an amazing job of that work. Because of their efforts, I mean, we're saving millions of dollars in additional capacity that we might need if discharges were just allowed to do whatever they want. And we're fortunate in Boise that our customers typically aren't that way. They want to meet those needs. So Austin and the team are an incredibly important part of the water renewal services overall. And I'll just share that moving forward, his team, as a utility, we're trying to get better at smart utility and using more data sets, almost more like live what's happening in the collection system, so that we can give information to the treatment system ahead of time. Hey, just a heads up, we got a slug load of X. It's probably going to be hitting the plant by next 3 or 4 hours. Those types of things Austin's group are going to be in the middle of and pushing, which is just really exciting. So just wanted to give them a shout out.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you for being the unsung ounce of prevention. I'll open it up for any questions from the commission. Commissioner Wertz.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Watkins. That was a great presentation. Curious, well, first I would say the BMP approach that the city's taking is, especially related to PFAS, seems really wise. I think we're just on the sort of cusp of some real big problems as we learn more and more about where this stuff is. We know a lot about some of the sources like in fire retardants and things like that, but with the liability issue under CERCLA that potentially could be there, that's big. I am curious if you know whether or not there's discussions of future permit monitoring, for example, the wastewater coming into the plant, whether there's going to be monitoring requirements in permits or in the effluent discharge to the river. If you have any inkling of that.
Chair, Commissioner, I will probably have to defer to Kate or Steve on that one.
Chair, Commissioner, we just received our water renewal facility permits in July, and they're good for 5 years. And those permits do not contain any type of PFAS monitoring. However, if they are adopted under CERCLA, or of course, if any aquatic life standards are developed, that those are the ways that they could show up on our permit if they're adopted by Idaho and then implemented in future permits. But right now, we do not have any permit limits or monitoring requirements.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the commission?
I do have one question. I promise I won't ask a million questions, but I thought our new commissioner brought up a good point. Mr. Chairman, may I?
Commissioner Luckett.
Thank you. So if those PFAS effluents did get in, at elevated levels into irrigation water, is when that's fed into pastures for farming, for animal use, et cetera, could the city be liable for those types of, hazards or the cleanup? We talked about the Superfund, we talked about cleanup, all these words that make us nervous, right? Liability, et cetera. And so if you could talk a little bit about the potential for that type of situation, that would be helpful, please.
Chair, Commissioner. As a city, I think our main concern is once the water enters our water renewal facilities, we then send the treated water to the Boise River and the solids to the 20 Mile South farm. So both of those, the actual treatment plant and then the 20 Mile South farm, I think are probably our first concern. Testing the effluent entering the Boise River, what then gets picked up downstream, that's broader in scope than my understanding, to be honest. I would have to probably defer to Mary here on the city's liability on that one. But from our, I guess our main focus right now is the two physical sites of the renewal facility and the 20 Mile South farm.
Yeah, I might add, Chair, the liability question is a good one. We really don't know how that would play out. I think one of the things we're trying to be smart about is certainly within the recycled water program, as we pivoted away from the Farmers Union Canal option over to our industrial reuse option. I think our ability to consider these types of compounds are going to be part of the pilot test that we're going to be doing. So part of the recycled water program is going to include a pilot, and we should have the equipment I want to say December, January. And the intention is to start looking at some of the industrial discharges that we have in the Southeast and testing the equipment, the different processes that we're piloting to see their efficacy on removal of all types of emerging constituents, not just PFAS. So I think we're trying to take a proactive approach. The liability piece, I think that's an open-ended question at this point. I don't know that anybody would have an answer on it. So we're trying to be careful. And I think this step on the PFAS BMP best management practice side is likely a smart first step, is to start getting ahead of this. That's kind of the intent.
Chair, Commissioner, if I might add one thing, the city is also, Kate can speak to this again more, but we're actively involved with a number of professional organizations who are commenting on these questions that don't have an easy answer. So I know the National Association of Clean Water Agencies, NACWA, is a big one that's the city's a part of. So my team with the pretreatment, we're focusing heavily on the working with our industries, but there's others at the city who are tackling some of these big ambiguous questions of, what are we liable for? What are we not liable for? With time, hopefully we have more answers.
And Austin and I are going to keep tag teaming back and forth. Just to follow up to that, is the city is engaged on these national discussions, like the classification under CERCLA. In fact, I just started reviewing some of the comments that we're going to provide to the national discussion around the potential for these to be CERCLA. We have a very strong opinion on that. as Austin suggested, we're a passive receiver of this. We don't generate these chemicals. So the idea that municipalities across the country would potentially be exposed to the liability associated with CERCLA, we think is inappropriate. And we're going to make comments to that effect.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Watkins, and Director. I appreciate that. I think you're on the right track. I think that's always the best way to be forward thinking, to make sure all the departments and different entities are looped together, because this is such a big issue. So I appreciate that it is broader in scope than just what we've heard today. So thank you for that.
Awesome. And I would just tag on how appreciative I am of the ounce of prevention approach. And I think that alignment with other departments within the Public Works Department, as well as approaches for our community broadly, I think that we're all we're marching to the same tune. Any other questions from the commission? Commissioner Ellis.
Thank you. Mine was more of a comment. I was curious about what your businesses are, how they're reacting, and you touched upon it. So I was just glad to hear that it sounds like for the most part that they are more than willing to talk and care about working together on solving it.
Chair, Commissioner, 100% agree. They're not always eager, and we recognize that. They're
nervous, maybe.
Yeah. Their mission is to turn a profit and be a functioning company. And we go into those meetings with that understanding. But with time, part of the reason we try to do these things early, maybe it takes 2 meetings. The first meeting is for them to share their thoughts, and then we all digest, and then we come back again, and it's like, no, this is the right call. Ultimately, this could be beneficial for them too, to know. So I think our approach, we hope that with time, it's seen as the prudent choice by all parties.
Any other questions from the commission? All right, hearing none. Thank you. Thank you.
Chair, Commissioners, Council Member, thank you.
All right, and that brings us to the next item on our agenda, the Watershed Education Center progress update. And I will turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Chair, and very excited to provide an update on the Watershed Education Center and the evolution to including that climate curriculum. So I want to turn it over to Cindy Bush, who's our Watershed Education Program Manager, and we'll walk through some updates, kind of where we are on the status of the reset at the watershed.
Chair Gravatt, Councilmember Badgett, and Commissioners, thank you so much. My name is Cindy Bush. I'm the Education Manager at the Boise Watershed Education Center. Today, I'm pleased to provide an update specifically on our exhibits project. Just an outline of what I'll be covering today. I'll cover our transformation into a water and climate center. I'll state the goals of our new exhibits, introduce you to the project team, overview our interpretive themes for the exhibits, share with you some of the community feedback that we've received, and then go over our timeline and next steps. So at the Watershed Education Center, we really view ourselves as the face of the utility. We share the messages of Public Works and our goals of enhancing the river and protecting the river. And we do that through 3 main strategies, mostly through our programming, our education and engagement programs, our public art, and then also our exhibits. And so for this presentation, I'll really focus on our exhibit transformation. Previously, about a year ago, when I presented to Commission, we did go over some of the education programming changes. So why should we transform the exhibits? They were developed in early 2007, and you can kind of remember the technology at that time. The iPhone was just coming out as a reminder. So these are pretty old technology-based exhibits that exist in the current exhibit hall. And we've really found that they're not quite relevant to people. People walk right by them, and it doesn't entice them to really return and re-engage with us. And so we recognize we really need to transform those into hands-on, engaging exhibits. Additionally, with the new exhibits, we really hope to increase our demand and our visitorship. Currently, our programs are what bring people through the doors. And so we really hope to flip that model and make the exhibits a big draw. Also, with this exhibit transformation, we have this great opportunity to align with our climate action roadmap strategy, specifically the strategy of innovation and engagement. That's the piece of the roadmap that really is kind of this future opportunity to engage with people on a community level, understand kind of where they're at, meet them where they're at, and really encourage climate action in our community. And we can do that through engaging them in the object of care in our community, and that is the Boise River. Also, with our new exhibits plus programming and public art, it really helps support the city's strategic goal of a clean city for everyone. What our new exhibit goals are specifically is we want to capture a wider range of visitors. Our original exhibits from 2007 really kind of speak to a narrow audience of 4th through 5th grade. And what we've heard from people and what we've seen come through our doors is all ages, including toddlers, all the way through senior citizens. So we're really trying to engage this wide audience and have something for everyone there. Again, we want to make the exhibits a draw themselves, make sure those exhibits have multiple outcomes and are more science center based rather than just a kiosk that one uses as a touch screen. Finally, all of our exhibits, we will be focusing locally on the Boise River and our watershed. It's really focusing on what's happening in our backyard, and people connect with that. Additionally, we want an outcome of the exhibits to really build this community, raising awareness of some of the issues to the Boise River as a result of our climate impacts, but also stimulating action and getting people excited about making our city more resilient to the impacts of climate change. Finally, accessibility is a huge goal of ours. We've been talking with some of the groups such as the Cross Disability Task Force, really trying to make these new exhibits as accessible as possible to a wide range of people. That also includes ensuring that our exhibits are bilingual, English and Spanish. So overall, what will the impact of these new exhibits be? We really hope that visitors will leave our facility feeling connected and informed, inspired yet hopeful about their role in water and climate solutions. And that is the goal, and the best practices in the climate communication world is always connect your head, your heart, and also your actions with a hopeful message. So nothing about the center will be doom and gloom. Wanted to introduce you to our project team on the exhibit project. There was a very competitive RFQ that was put out in February, and we had really 6 top-notch exhibit designers around the country to choose from. We selected a firm called Reich and Petch. They're out of New York and Toronto. They have over 30 years of experience. Most notably, they worked on the Smithsonian Fossil Hall, as well as the Science North Museum, which is a climate science museum. So very exciting to have their breadth of experience and their vision with us. As well, we've subcontracted with an audio-visual design firm called RLMG, Richard Lewis Media Group. They too bring 30+ years experience, and you're probably most familiar with their work through the Idaho State Museum exhibits. So all of the technology-based exhibits there, they help design. And then locally, we're working with contractors Byron Falwell, an architect, and ESI, small business team, to really kind of look at the architectural improvements that will come as a result of the new exhibits. Now we'll move on to our main exhibit themes. As I mentioned earlier, we're keeping our themes as local as possible and really allowing our visitors who tend to be from our watershed to really connect with the water resources in our backyard. And so first and foremost, we'll introduce them to their water in our watershed. And that section will have a little bit about personal connection to water, the value of water to collectively to a lot of different people. And then our watershed, what is a watershed? What's happening in our watershed? What changes are we seeing in our watershed? Next, we'll be looking at the lens of how climate impacts are changing the Boise River and our water resources. So we'll take a look at changes to the Boise River, including water quality, water availability, and drought. And to do that, we'll be looking at objects of care. Essentially, what do we afford to lose in this community? And so we'll take that lens of protecting the Boise River and instilling the messages of immediate climate action. How can someone get involved on a personal level? And how can someone get involved at a community level? And so that speaks also to our multiple audiences. Kids will connect with that personal level, and adults will mainly connect with that community level of change. Finally, water renewal is still our cup of tea, and we will feature not only the process of water renewal, but we want to highlight where our utility's been and where it's going. And we'll continue to offer these exhibits in tandem with water renewal tours that will be offered regularly. Last week, the exhibit design team was here on site in Boise, and we were able to hold 3 open houses for our members of the public. They were well attended, had about 100 people over those 3 days. And really, we got some very valuable feedback, not only from families, but also professionals in the education and climate worlds, as well as those that represent folks of diverse backgrounds. And so in talking to them, we were able to overview some of the exhibit themes. And what we heard was a resounding support for those themes. Many of them were very excited about this project. Some of the kids especially had quite a bit to share about their ideas. But in general, we heard that people of all ages will be coming through the doors. A family might have a toddler and might have a middle school student. So how are you going to meet the needs of all of those ages? And we can do that through incorporating more hands-on exhibits. So more tactile exhibits is one of the goals. We also heard that continue to tie the Boise River throughout all of our messages, including the climate action section. And so always drawing back to water. And then finally, keep our messages hopeful. And that's something that we know is tried and true in the climate communication world. And it was reiterated again from our stakeholder meetings. Also, the community feedback tied in with a 2-day workshop with the exhibit designers. And it was just perfect timing, because we were able to incorporate the feedback that we heard the previous evening directly into our conversations, which shaped the exhibits. So it was a win-win, honestly. This is my final slide, and I just want to share with you the exhibit timeline. So when will you see new exhibits? Not until June of 2024, but we are well on our way in our schematic design process here now in 2022. Now that we're in fiscal year 23, we're going to begin further developing the exhibit design concepts, and that includes more stakeholder engagement. I'd like to invite you to attend those next open houses. We'll hold those likely in mid-January, so look for an invitation from me, as well as we'll have the opportunity to hire our fabricator, and the fabricator will begin to prototype some of these exhibits. Finally, exhibit production will be in full scale by the end of 23. Architectural improvements will likely come at the beginning of fiscal year 24, and that'll necessitate a roughly 6 to 8 month closure of the facility from anticipated November of 23 through June of 24. With that, I will open it up for questions.
Awesome, thank you. And I will just kick things off by saying that I had the opportunity to join one of these sessions last week, and I think that it's some amazing work that's going on there. And just hearing some of the conversations that were taking place between some of the exhibit designers, staff, and members of the community, those were really, really enriching in a number of different ways. And I look forward to following up at the next open house. And with that, I would open it to the commission for any questions that you have.
Chair,
Commissioner Morgan.
I would like to ask a question or just provide a comment. This was a really beautiful presentation, gets me very excited about being able to share our incredible knowledge with the community to help them get involved and support climate action. But my comment was more along the lines of for future stakeholder engagement, I think it'd be really critical and important to make sure that tribes are specifically invited to these processes. So that way they can contribute their knowledge since they're the original water holders and keepers of this land. So making sure to include their thoughts and their ideas, I think is very critical to making sure that we have more sustainable, inclusive ideas in this process moving forward.
Chair, Commissioner, I 100% agree. And attempts have been made to reach out to the tribes, and we'll continue to ensure that their voices are heard throughout the exhibits.
Great, thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Commissioner Wernz?
Yes, thank you. That was a great presentation. I haven't been to the watershed lately, but have been a fan in the past. And I guess what I need is a little bit of context that would help. Just from the standpoint of users, what does the last 5 years look like as far as who's using the facility, who's coming to visit, and what's the trend line look on that? Because you're doing some really exciting things to update it, but I just have no idea how it's used right now.
Chair, Commissioner, thank you for your question. We have partnerships with West Ada School District and the Boise School District. And so in the past, the entire second grade level had come out from West Ada, and we had just secured the sixth graders coming from Boise School District right before the pandemic hit. But in terms of usage, the majority of our visitors are school children, majority being upper elementary. And then we also serve quite a few of the high schools and middle schools through outreach programs. And then secondarily, the family audience. We see a lot of families, particularly in the summer, especially since the 2017 River Campus edition of the water feature and public art outside. So families with kids of all ages tends to be our second biggest stakeholder. And third, we recently added, I'd say in the last 5 years, added some adult programming. And we have a built-in audience now of a lot of different adults attending those programs.
Commissioner Ellis?
I was going to say, I was going to add something else, but Chair Wernz, I'm your target audience because from about 2009 to as of 4 years ago, I must have gone there multiple times with my children, and it was awesome. My favorite part was, figuring out when you flush at your house, how does it get to which facility? That's the most exciting part. It's my favorite. Now I got to remember what my question was. Now I got totally sidetracked. I was going to say that one of the most impactful things too that I'm sure you will keep with it is how I'm able to talk to my kids and their friends every single time is the Boise River and the ocean and the connection of this is why I'm picking up the plastic bag. This is why it ends up in the ocean. And so if keep that theme, that is going to be so important because that is why they listen to me and pick things up. Thank you.
Chair, Commissioner, excellent point. And yes, actually, we heard that through the stakeholder meetings as well, as show that connection from the Boise River to the ocean. So that will definitely be a point that we include in the watershed section. And we also are working on a special area for showcasing Flush Mapper. I also wanted to build on the previous answer to let you know numbers, attendance. We see about 20,000 people on site in a typical year pre-COVID, and then about 8,000 off-site through outreach.
It's incredible. Commissioner Cross.
Chair, I would just like to add, as a senior in high school, I have loved growing up around the Boise watershed. I've been there multiple times and gone on the tours, and I'm really excited to see what the new program looks like.
Chair, Commissioner, thank you. And I may have been your teacher on one of those tours. So thanks for coming out.
Well, let's get your whole class coming out to a field trip for the next design session. Any other questions or comments from the commission? All right, hearing none, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Awesome. And that brings us to the next item on our agenda, the 2023 Department Priorities Overview. And I will turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Chair. And we are rushing this a little bit just because we have a hard stop at 6. Council chambers needs to be set up for another meeting. So, but we're going to jump in, and if we don't finish, we can always kind of take it back up at the next meeting. So I'm excited to turn it over to Colin Hickman. He mentioned that he's the new Business Strategy Senior Manager in Public Works. It's a position that was added for FY23. And his role is going to be really working on some of those non-technical issues, right? So in Public Works, we do a lot of projects, a lot of engineering, a lot of very technical things. But we're recognizing that what's coming in the future, we're going to need to focus on staff, on leadership development, on business planning. So Colin's going to talk a little bit about some of that work. One of the things that's coming out from the leadership team of Public Works and their staff is just being better about prioritizing work. And that may sound like a simple thing, but Colin's going to talk a little bit about that. The world that we live in now is just very different from, say, 10, 15 years ago. The speed with which things are changing, the new challenges that pop up. So there's a little bit of, we have to be more nimble than maybe in the past. And so Colin's going to talk about that a little bit, just to give you a sense for in 2023, what are the priorities, but what are some of the things that we're working on to make sure that we can be as quick as possible when certain things pop up, and we can pivot to a new priority that may come up. So Colin.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, and Chair, Commissioners, nice to see you all this afternoon. Nice to be with you. Thanks for your time as always. Tough act to follow the watershed. I will do my best. So as Steve mentioned, this will be a quick overview today. We have limited time, and this presentation is really not meant to be a deep dive into all of our priorities because we have many, but really the objective of the presentation today is to give you a sense and scope of the work. And also to show you many of these topics will be coming, if not all of them, will be coming back before you for more in-depth presentations. But this is, again, just to give you a sense of the scope and breadth of the work ahead of us for the year. So the photo over here we've used in several presentations, just an old shot of the Boise River. And I included this to just highlight the evolution of Public Works. I think it's an important point to make. Steve and I were talking just the other day that it's not your grandparents' Public Works department. That there were some folks in the past that had said it was just a wastewater treatment utility. That's all. And just to see the shift in the evolution of this department has been striking. Even in the years that I've been with the city, that evolution has been pretty dramatic. And so just a couple points to touch on, that our work is rapidly changing and evolving. Just the complexity. You think of some of Steve Hubbell's work around climate action, how quickly energy is changing. You think about the volume of work that is coming our direction because of the need for, say, recycling water. So you just look at all of these things, but also the topic areas are growing and evolving. No longer are we just a utility that treats wastewater, but as you saw from some of the presentations today, that role continues to grow. And then just community perception viewed as an environmental protector and steward. And so how we live up to that, how we continue to rise to that expectation and perceptions is going to be continually important to this department. And one of the adages that we say that I think still rings very true is just what got us here won't get us to where we need to go. So how we continue to evolve with the challenges and the work in front of us.
Just real quick comment
yeah,
on that. That may sound like, that's a critique of the past. It's not at all.
Yeah.
What was happening in the past was the right thing to do for those times. But when we look back to what got us to today and we look forward to what's needed in the future, we do need to evolve this thing. And so that's kind of the intention. It's not to imply that somehow what was happening in the past wasn't correct.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. So just a bit about the world as we know, and I included this photo here. This was some of the folks on Jim's team that oversee our geothermal system. This was some infrared imaging done of the geothermal system. So it's a pretty dramatic photo there, but just really neat to see the confluence of technology and energy in this space. But really the gist of this slide is that all the bodies of work that we're engaged in are really in a time of flux. So you look at energy and everything that's happening in the markets with renewable energy, massive amounts of change. As my colleagues have shared with you today in the presentations that preceded me, the world of water is changing dramatically as we're in the middle of it. It was not too long ago the world of trash and recycling was completely upended with plastics recycling. There was a real threat to paper recycling. So just this body of work is not static by any means. Transportation, the work that we're involved in and the evolution of electric vehicles. So think about even at the city here with our fleet vehicles and fire trucks and garbage collection vehicles, the role that transportation and electric vehicles is shifting underneath our feet very rapidly. And then even facilities management. So Sean and his team, where previously it was maybe a calculation of just how we construct a building. Now they're looking at envelopes and energy return, and where do we place renewables? If that makes sense, what's the return on investment? So the world, as we know, is changing, and all of these sectors are in flux. On top of that, we have some really dynamic issues that we are engaged with on a day-to-day basis. So the photos I included here, I think really typify what I'll be sharing. But essentially, a lot of the charge of our work is what was once thought of as waste. So you can think about wastewater, what's in the water, and how do we change that into products? So the photo there on your left is of our 20-mile south farm, where actually Ben was here earlier, the manager of our farm, but where we take a lot of those biosolids and actually grow crops. Our ability to harvest different materials from whether it's waste or whether it's recycling, is a real charge of our work. The reduce and reuse versus just management. So what is coming to us and what we have to manage versus how we proactively start to have conversations upstream, if you will. I love this photo of our compost facility and the large windrows of how we actually create and make the compost. But just starting to really wrestle with that dynamic of managing waste versus having conversations about how do we reduce the amount of waste that comes to us. Renewable energy, I touched on just how quickly that's evolving, but also we're in a time in our utility where there's a lot of infrastructure. Even if you think about what Cindy touched on as something as something as simple as exhibits, but you start thinking about our water renewal facilities, a lot of our collection system have a lot of infrastructure that is aging out. New financing tools and approaches. So Heather and her team do incredible work around how we leverage new approaches that perhaps weren't available in the past. And I'll touch on some of those here briefly. And then climate opportunities. This is something that is evolving. Steve Hubble and his team work on making sure that we are at the forefront of a lot of these opportunities that are coming our way, but also how our work integrates under a climate umbrella is incredibly important. And then lastly, Cindy touched on this a little bit, but I think this is incredibly important. So I believe the commission has seen this before, but several years ago, the city worked with several different organizations, including the University of Idaho, Boise State University, to really break down when we hear climate change. I think a lot of us think global, a lot of us think, far-flung spaces, but we really wanted to better understand what climate change means here in Boise. And so based on that study, they identified the top 8 impacts to our region, to our city, what we could anticipate seeing. And I just wanted to highlight with some fancy animation that 6 out of the 8 are related to water. And so Cindy mentioned just that really close tie of water to climate. And so in all our priorities, you'll see a lot of these climate impacts coming to the fore. So again, this is one slide. This will not be a deep dive. And certainly I may be able to field a very high level question about any of these, but I would have to turn to Steve or my colleagues here for any in-depth questions on any of these. But again, really just kind of giving commission here this evening in the several minutes that we have a high level overview of what 2023 will look like for the Department of Public Works. You'll see the box at the top. I think one of the things that this department really wrestles with, I'm sure as every department at the city does, is like, how do we balance the annual priorities, the big picture, the innovation, the what's new, but also with that critical importance of delivering services every single day to our residents and businesses. So whether it's, as Austin presented on, just ensuring that we have a customer service in our pre-treatment program, we're delivering that service. You think about water renewal services, providing collection and treatment services to 73,000 homes, however many we have now in Boise. That's important, and that reliability is important. You think about collection of trash and recycling and compost every single week, every other week, and that's incredibly important. So while we will touch on these ones below, it's important to point out to commission here this evening that will always be kind of a baseline for us, and never want to have that be lower down, because it's incredibly important to our residents and our businesses. I'll present these in no particular order. I did my best to order them by alphabetizing them. I may have messed up, so I apologize, but they are not based on any ranking or anything like that. But I'll just start from the top here. Building vehicle electrification. During the year, I'm sure Steve Hubble or his team will provide an update on what that looks like. But as our city starts to make progress towards our goal of carbon neutrality by 2050, how we move away from other sources and move toward electrification of whether we're bringing online new buildings. So think of a new fire station, or think of if we're retrofitting an old building, what does that electrification process look like? But also we have a large fleet here at the city of Boise. So what does that replacement schedule look like of old gas vehicles to electrified vehicles? So a lot of work happening in that space that will continue. 2023 will be a big year for that. Green tariff is essentially setting a rate with Idaho Power for what renewable energy delivered to our city, to our facilities, think municipal facilities would look like. And so the leadership team, Steve's team, is working hard with our partners at Idaho Power on coming up with what that rate looks like, so that we can move toward that 100% carbon neutral by 2050. It's a huge part of how we'll get there. One thing I did want to highlight that Steve mentioned was just some of the, we have kind of the hard priorities that you'll see here, but also really not losing focus on what's important to us as a department. And so we did some work in December where we did some surveying of our employees, just wanting to hear from them. Obviously with COVID, there's a lot happening in the dynamics of an organization. So really just wanted to check in. And one of the things that came to light was that internal communications is incredibly important, making sure they feel connected to the priorities, they feel connected to their peers. I think you all have probably worked in organizations where sometimes you can feel like you're in a silo. And so how do we up our game around internal communications so that not only do our staff feel more connected to the priorities and the work, they have a better sense of where they fit into that incredibly important work and are connected to their peers in meaningful ways. The Micron expansion, I'm sure you all have seen the news. So staff, Haley Faulkner, who is on the call, and her team are working incredibly hard with partners on what our role around that will be. There's many discussions happening on how the city will partner with Micron. And I would imagine that there will be, if not one, several presentations coming back before Public Works Commission on updates to that project. But just understood that this is a significant priority for the department in 23. I believe, as Kate or Austin mentioned, we have 2 water renewal facilities in the city of Boise. Lander Street, which is off Veterans Park, which many of you probably know. And we've presented to commission on this in the past, but the team out at Lander Street is doing really good work on essentially constructing, overhauling the entire facility. So phase one has just wrapped up, which Josh Baker, who is overseeing a lot of that construction, described to me as kind of the front end of the facility and the back end facility. And so now phase two will really be looking at how we focus, how we start to build out the middle portions of the facility. But needless to say, significant investment at Lander Street and a lot of construction happening in 2023 and planning. Leadership team development. So many of the faces that you see here this evening, also not wanting to lose sight of that as an organization and as the leadership within the organization. We really need to invest in how our development as a group and as a leadership team moves forward, so that we're better able to collaborate, to function, to align. So we're going to be investing some time into this year, spending a lot more time focusing on how we as a leadership team come together to tackle some of these incredibly challenging topics that I brought up earlier, and some of these dynamics. Moving on to the right column. So one of the projects that we've been undertaking, and this at some point, again, will be in front of Public Works Commission, but the organization structure of Public Works is decades old. And so this year and this previous year, we kicked off the project of looking at what a new organizational structure could look like for the department. And again, going back to how we deliver on the expectations of our community, probably need some updates to how we're set up to do that. And so just letting commission know that is happening, and we'll be back in front of you with more updates as that moves forward. Again, I'm sure the second bullet here in this column comes as no surprise, and the city is certainly not immune from the market challenges with just keeping employees, retaining employees, but also finding employees, and this continues to be a priority, and we're working really hard with our partners in human resources to how we ramp that up, because staffing challenges have real implications in our world, as the presentations pointed out earlier. The critical services that we deliver at the end of the day require people to do those, and so how we make sure that we are getting the best, the brightest, how we're getting people in the door, but also how we're keeping them, will be a huge priority for the leadership team and our partners in HR this year, because doing nothing here is not an option. So then turning our attention to West Boise, which is the other water renewal facility, which is where the watershed is located. For those of you maybe not familiar, down below I guess was the HP campus, now is the state of Idaho. Is that right? But shifting from essentially, a collection of, you can imagine at a large water renewal facilities, the amount of work that's happening on. And so really looking, and what has been done at Lander Street is how we implement what's called, program management. So shifting away from a collection of projects. So we're doing this over on this side of the facility, this over here. How do we look at that at a more holistic way and in a strategic way? So we've just hired a West Boise program manager who's going to be looking at that facility and have that oversight, bird's eye view of all the different projects that are going on, and how we stack and rack those and make sure that we're approaching them in a strategic manner. The other priority that I'd mention at West Boise, and I would certainly have to turn to Jim or Steve with any questions on this, but essentially shifting to what's called a CMGC, and Cindy mentioned it before for an acronym, but construction manager, general contractor. And so this essentially is bringing on that construction manager earlier in the process, so that when we start to have major projects coming into form, we're not designing and then reaching out to a contractor at the end of the process, but essentially bringing them in from the get-go so they can be part of that planning process, so they can make us the end outcomes better. And then, as I mentioned before, Heather and her team working really hard on, as you all remember, the water renewal bond election. So that the financing that is associated with that, the WIFIA loan through the EPA, you can imagine the amount of work that goes into ensuring that the responsible management of that financing is implemented is significant. So I know that was a lot. Perhaps I'll pause there, Chair, if that is good for the commission. Steve, please.
Yeah, I thought I would just jump in, Chair. These aren't numbered. They're not listed as this is the top priority just yet. One of the things we're going to have a discussion internally with the team part of what we're seeing happening now within Public Works and frankly across the city is at any one time, one of these is going to be the top priority, right? So for example, the Micron expansion is top of mind for everybody right now in Public Works. It's a lot of work. In the next probably 3 to 6 months, we got to get a strong foundation for that project. That's why Haley Faulkner has been basically taken off her other duties and she is leading that effort. That's all she's doing, just because it's such a big effort. Now that for the next 3 to 6 months is going to be a top priority. So as we communicate that in the organization, when Haley reaches out for a piece of information, it's probably an urgent request. Please be as responsive as possible. So if you're working on something, maybe set that aside for the time being, for the half hour or whatever you need to do to respond to that. Similarly, the WIFIA bond financing. Right now, we're in a little bit of a lull, although it's going to pick back up because we're trying to get that finalized. As we start to try to get that finalized, that's going to kind of come up to the top of the list, right? For at least a short period of time where, okay, if Heather and her team reach out for information, put aside what you're doing because they need these answers because this has got to happen. So what we're trying to get better at in Public Works is we know that there are priorities, and if you don't have priorities, then nothing's a priority. That's a classic saying, right? But these are the ones that are probably going to be shifting up and down the top list and rotating around over the year. But these are the big ones that we're trying to handle this year. There's a lot more than what's on that slide going on in Public Works. I don't want to imply that that's it. But these are the ones that jump out as requiring extra effort, maybe specialized approaches, maybe something we've never done before, so it requires additional attention. So I just wanted to highlight that before we open it up to some questions.
Awesome. Thank you for that clarification. Any questions from the commission? I would just make a quick note, not a question, but recruitment and retention. I address this a lot in my day job, and there may be opportunities to cross over with some of the exhibits and programming at the watershed for some more long-term connection with some of the high-need jobs that we have in Public Works.
I appreciate that, Sharon. And something I would add there is, well, two things. One, right now we have about a 10 to 15% vacancy rate. That's extremely high. It's not uncommon across any sector at this point. So we're hustling. We're adding some HR positions, recruiters, et cetera, to try to figure out how to fill those. Second, long-term, I appreciate you saying that. One of the things, the Micron opportunity, and I say opportunity, presents all kinds of interesting twists to it, right? One of them could be workforce development. We're recognizing that we need to do a better job of developing our own talent, both internally that are already here, but also how do you reach out to like a College of Western Idaho? If you've been out to the West Boise Water Renewal Facility, the fire training center is right there. And I drive by there and I look at it, it's like, why don't we have some equivalent of that for water renewal? They're basically training their own workforce and developing it. It's a pretty cool model. So we're trying to evolve that. Stay tuned on some of that. We may be asking questions of you all to figure out how best to do that, but it's certainly top of mind.
Awesome. And I would volunteer in my professional capacity as well to continue this conversation. Any other questions or comments from the commission?
Yeah, I do have questions / comments here. When you spoke specifically about the work at Micron and all the infrastructure that's going to take place, is there any talk about partnering with developers because if you think of all aside from the actual facilities that are going to happen and all the infrastructure that's needed there, additional housing and development that's going to need to happen, is there a plan to tackle that?
Chair, Commissioner, thank you for the question. There are a lot of conversations happening right now between Micron and the city and any number of issues like housing, like recycled water, like transportation. And so we're in the early stages of that. At some point, it'll be good to be able to give you guys an update on what's happening. At this point, it's early, but those conversations certainly are happening.
Thank you.
Commissioner Werntz?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a really huge list and very diverse list. I guess maybe just stepping back, I see why it's very internally focused. There's some real urgent needs, recruitment, restructuring. Some of those things are high demand. I guess it's more of a really higher level question just about the opportunity for having the community understand more about some of the things that are happening, the external focus. There's some real opportunities to reach ratepayers with, we're not just electrifying because it's the thing to do. Here's the cost benefit of this. Here's how it's going to pay off in the long run, if that data is available and stuff like that. Because I think, I don't know, from my perspective, it's amazing what Public Works does, but doesn't, that nobody knows. And maybe that used to be a little bit of the paradigm for departments, was better. If something goes wrong, everybody knows, right? But there's an awful lot of leadership out of this department, it looks like to me, and an expanding role that the citizenry needs to understand. And I guess I just was looking for that external, where you might have that piece. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, Commissioner, really appreciate that question. And certainly it's difficult. I mean, that, you know, within even, you can see all the priorities here that we theoretically would want to communicate, but then you layer in that with all the departments at the city trying to use the same channels of communication. So constantly balancing the needs of, but you're absolutely right. And I think we've put a really high precedent on communications and what we do. Natalie's here, and we work really closely with our community engagement team to really look across the board, look at all of these items. And you're exactly right that a lot of these items, not only it would be good to have, but really thinking about particularly some of our climate and electrification goals, they depend on community engagement and education. So you're absolutely right. And we have, Natalie is in the Water Renewal Fund and is focused on communication. We also have her colleague, Melissa, who is in the CURBIT, the trash recycling and compost, who is focused on communication. And they both do an outstanding job. But you're right that as these continue to evolve and grow, we're also going to need to grow and amplify our communication and engagement. So really appreciate the comment.
I would just add, Chair, Commissioner Warrens, it's a really good point you're bringing up. And one of the things that Colin's going to be working on, and we'll be testing, frankly, with you all, is like that program management you see there. That's functionally an internal function to execute on projects and coordinating across those projects. What Jim and Josh are developing is a dashboard that reports out how we're doing, right? So for the public, that dashboard, the first page or two will be really high level, which could be something that we could provide externally to say, look, we're being responsible with what you gave us the green light on the bond financing. We want to show you how we're spending the money. We're being responsible. We're tracking in a lot of detail how we're doing that. So some of this is, it's a good point. And what can we use that's already being produced to potentially turn that externally to explain to the citizens what's happening in Public Works. Colin's also going to be working on developing metrics and KPIs for the organization. We have those in kind of across the organization, but we haven't kind of gathered them all in a document or a page that you could say, okay, I see what Public Works is working on. And I can see that most of the KPIs are green. There's a couple that are yellow. So a lot of that is to come. Keep the feedback coming to see if that's hitting it, or if it's like, yeah, that's still too technical. You need to get at a higher level. So stay tuned, I think.
Awesome. And in the interest of time, I think that we had better wrap up here. We will dive deeper into discussions on all of these 11 topics throughout this coming year. So I look forward to those discussions. And also, in the interest of time, I may recommend that we postpone updates from our subcommittee meetings, discussion on that to our next meeting. And to do that, I would entertain a motion to move those discussions to our next regular meeting.
Chair Gravatt, I move that we move the subcommittee meeting summaries to the next month's agenda.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second
that, Mr. Chair.
Second from Commissioner Wirtz.
Okay,
all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, the same sign? Hearing none, the motion carries. Any other business to come before the commission?
Just one last thing, Chair. We actually didn't finish the presentation, so might I suggest, that's okay. No, that's all right. We'll come back and finish up and make sure that we're getting all the commissioners' questions answered. I'm sure there are other questions. I didn't want to just say that's it.
Gotcha.
So,
All right, so we'll be moving this discussion also. So I'll entertain a motion to move the remainder of the 2023 department priorities overview to our next regular meeting as well.
Thank you.
Commissioner
Chair-
Ellis.
Chair Kavai, I move that we move the 2023. Sorry, forgot the title. Thank you. Department priorities overview to next month's agenda, the remaining portion of the presentation for the department priorities overview for 2023.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
You do.
Second from Commissioner Werntz. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, the same sign? Hearing none, the motion carries. And now our final motion, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Chair, I entertain a motion to conclude.
We have a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
I second it.
Motion and second. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes and we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Meeting.
Thank you all.
Bye.